On a late evening inside the Smith family home, Will Smith stood frozen in front of a dimly lit hallway, holding a set of medical papers he had been avoiding for hours. This was not the expression of a man preparing for another Hollywood comeback. This was the face of a father staring at a truth that had shattered his confidence more brutally than any public scandal ever could. For the first time in his life, Will looked as though he was rehearsing a goodbye he never imagined he would have to say. He whispered something under his breath, words soft, uneven, trembling not because cameras were watching, but because his son, Jaden, was lying just a few steps away, struggling through a pain no one in the family had fully understood until now. And inside those medical pages, Will clutched so tightly, were the results that had forced every member of the Smith household to confront a new reality, a diagnosis carrying dangers far greater than anyone expected. A diagnosis the world still didn't know existed. Those who saw Will that night say he didn't move for nearly a minute, as if time had paused around him. The man who once carried blockbuster films on his shoulders suddenly appeared fragile, almost defeated, like someone trying to prepare himself for a battle he feared he couldn't win. And yet no matter how hard he tried to steady his breath, one question kept echoing inside him. How long has my son been fighting this alone? But before the world learned the truth about Jaden's condition, long before the diagnosis was written in ink, the signs were already there, quiet, subtle, slowly building into a crisis no one recognized soon enough. To understand how things reached this point, we must go back to the origins of the Smith family's unique journey, back to the childhood that shaped Jaden into the person he became, and the pressures that quietly pushed him toward the most difficult chapter of his young life. Will Smith had always imagined fatherhood as redemption. He grew up in a home shadowed by volatility and fear, and he vowed that his own children would never face the instability that once haunted him. So, he built a world where everything seemed possible: creativity, freedom, expression, and endless opportunity. But that freedom came wrapped in a spotlight so bright that no child could escape its intensity. Jaden did not learn how to walk in private. He learned while cameras waited. He did not discover his identity through quiet experimentation. He discovered it while magazines and online critics analyzed his every choice. Every hairstyle, every outfit, every interview became a headline, and the pressure of an identity evolving in public began shaping him long before he had the emotional maturity to understand it. Will believed he was offering his children a life better than the one he had known, yet even he could not foresee how fame would complicate their inner worlds. The same spotlight that elevated them also distorted their sense of self, and the public rarely allowed them to exist as ordinary teens. Willow faced breakdowns under intense music industry expectations, and Jaden, the more silent of the two, began slipping into emotional spaces that even those closest to him struggled to understand. As he entered his early 20s, Jaden's once bold expression began transforming into something heavier. He grew more withdrawn, more fatigued, and far more fragile than the energetic boy the public remembered. His weight fluctuated, his appetite wavered, and his physical strength began fading in ways that couldn't be ignored. At first, these changes seemed connected to his strict vegan lifestyle, something the family had dealt with before. But over time, the symptoms stopped fitting the nutrition narrative. The pain became more frequent, his exhaustion intensified, and his emotional energy, which had once fueled his creativity, now seemed to be slipping away with alarming speed. Family members suggested medical checkups. Friends noticed his declining stamina. Yet each time he sought help, the explanations were kept simple: stress, diet imbalance, fatigue. Nothing more. But inside the Smith home, the unease was growing. There were nights when Jaden's discomfort kept him awake, mornings when he struggled to eat, and days when normal routines became too difficult to complete. Slowly, the family began realizing that something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface. Then came the moment no parent forgets, when the symptoms became too severe to ignore. When the physical pain finally forced Jaden into an emergency consultation, he underwent a new set of tests, the kind doctors reserve for situations where previous assumptions no longer hold weight. And this time, the results could not be dismissed. The room fell silent when the imaging appeared. Something inside Jaden's body had been growing without warning. Something aggressive, something that required immediate attention and carried implications no family ever wants to confront. The diagnosis was not gentle, not vague, and not something that could be handled casually. It explained the exhaustion. It explained the pain. It explained the rapid decline the family had been witnessing, and it made Will Smith feel smaller, more helpless, and more terrified than he had ever been even in his darkest public moments. This was not a career setback. This was not internet criticism. This was not another headline he could simply ignore. This was his son. And when Will finally sat beside Jaden's bed that evening, he wasn't preparing a speech or gathering strength for the cameras. He was trying to understand how to support a child facing a battle far bigger than anything fame had ever prepared them for. The diagnosis was not shared publicly, nor were the details disclosed to the press. The family made a collective choice to protect Jaden's privacy, even as speculation online grew louder. Behind closed doors, tests were being reviewed. Specialists were being consulted. Treatment plans were being considered. And Will, who had once believed he could fix any problem through sheer willpower, had to accept that this time he could only stand beside his son, not shield him. Jaden, meanwhile, was processing more than a medical crisis. He was confronting the emotional aftermath of years spent under intense public scrutiny. His struggle with identity, which the world often mocked or dismissed, had left deeper wounds than anyone realized. He was not only battling a physical threat, but also the psychological weight of years spent defending himself against a world that rarely allowed him to simply be human. For Will, this realization carried its own pain. He had built a life meant to liberate his children, yet in ways he never foresaw, that liberation had trapped them. And now, as he watched Jaden navigate the realities of his diagnosis, the guilt of past decisions hovered over him with relentless persistence. Still, even under the shadow of fear, the Smith family chose unity. Meetings with medical teams became routine. Emotional support became a daily priority. And the world, unaware of what was happening behind the scenes, continued forming theories that drifted further and further from the truth. But Jaden's condition began shaping Will in ways nothing else ever had. He became quieter, more reflective, more fragile in the moments when he wasn't required to perform for the outside world. He stopped focusing on public perception and redirected every ounce of energy into supporting his son. And slowly, the world began noticing that something had shifted. The once loud Smith family was suddenly silent. Events were canceled. Public appearances became rare. Smiles looked heavier. Will stopped speaking about future projects. Jada became noticeably protective. And Willow stepped back from the spotlight entirely. The audience didn't know why. But now, the truth becomes clear. Will Smith wasn't stepping away from Hollywood because of scandals or criticism. He was stepping away because he was preparing for the possibility every parent fears most. He was preparing for the hardest goodbye. Yet even in the midst of this devastating chapter, one reality refuses to fade. The Smith family, broken, shaken, frightened, is still fighting, still hoping, still refusing to let a diagnosis define the end of their story. And as they move through this fragile period with quiet determination, the question remains: will Jaden's journey become the turning point that rebuilds the Smith family, or the moment that finally breaks them? Because for Will Smith, this isn't about fame anymore. It's about time, faith, and the hope that he will never have to say the goodbye he has been preparing in his heart.